Jeffrey Clark is a former official in the Trump Department of Justice. You may remember his home was searched by the FBI in June of last year. He was left waiting outside in his underwear as they executed the search warrant and seized his phone. It was all part of the ongoing investigation into the ex-president's attempts to overturn the 2020 election results. Well, Jeffrey Clark now faces potential disbarment in Washington, D.C. related to his false claims of voter fraud in Georgia. Clark is also the guy who pushed the theory that a voting machine had accessed the internet through, wait for it, a smart thermostat with a net connection trail leading back to China. And this guy has now emerged as a favorite to become the next attorney general if Donald Trump wins a second term, as Ankush Khardori reports in New York Magazine. Joining me now is Ankush Khardori. He's a former federal prosecutor for the Department of Justice and a contributing editor for New York Magazine, where his new article is titled, "The Sequel Will Be Worse. Trump's former Justice Department officials fear a second term." Ankush, it's so good to have you here. You had the opportunity to talk to several senior officials from Trump's Justice Department about what a second Trump term would mean for the DOJ. Lay out the highlights of what you learned from those conversations.
The biggest takeaway for me was that almost everyone volunteered that they were concerned that Trump would effectively turn the Justice Department against his political enemies. Now, Trump himself has been talking about doing that in the wake of his indictment by the special counsel's office. And Trump did, of course, attempt to sort of use the Justice Department to his benefit, to help his allies, to punish his foes during his first administration. And even though there were some criminal investigations of his political opponents, people like FBI Director Andrew McCabe, Hillary Clinton, John Kerry, and so forth, none of those progressed to an actual criminal prosecution. And the thing that I heard over and over again in the course of this reporting was that people were concerned that he will do this again. He will be more aggressive about it, and he may be able to staff the department with more pliant people who will carry out his orders.
You know, just hours after Trump was arraigned in that classified documents case, he said this in a speech at his New Jersey golf club. Take a listen.
I will appoint a real special prosecutor to go after the most corrupt president in the history of the United States of America, Joe Biden, and the entire Biden crime family.
I mean, Ankush, let's be very clear here. Hunter Biden has already been prosecuted by the Department of Justice. It's not like the DOJ is asleep at the wheel for crimes that are being committed or alleged crimes that are being committed. When you spoke to people about his threats to prosecute Biden and his family, what'd they tell you?
Well, look, there is a definite reservoir of skepticism among Republicans, conservatives, people who staff the last Justice Department about the handling of the Hunter Biden prosecution. I don't want to sort of totally downplay that. However, I don't think that the people from the first term adopt this framework that Trump is espousing at all. They do not think that there's this sort of invariable two-track system of justice that's, you know, one track is about pursuing him and the other track is about just letting everyone off. So for the most part, you know, people didn't buy this this sort of theory of the case, but found it worrisome precisely because, you know, it's been one thing for people like you and me to be concerned about a scenario like this. We were concerned during the first administration, concerned about a potential second administration, but he's now telling us this very, very explicitly, that this is what he intends to do, that he intends to turn the Justice Department against Joe Biden and his family and potentially other political opponents of his.
Yeah, but Ankush, he's already done that, though. I mean, it's not like it was a secret. It's not like he intends on doing it. He weaponized the IRS. He went after other people. They were audited, right? I mean, it was Comey and McCabe. They were actually audited. I mean, it's not like he hasn't already used federal agencies in order to do this. But one way that he did it, that you learned and that we've seen, he took people that were acting in these roles, or he put them in these roles, and they didn't have to be Senate confirmed, or they didn't have to go through an official process to do it. Is that a concern that was been articulated to you when you were preparing this piece, that that's how Trump's going to go and weaponize more agencies, including the DOJ?
Yeah, that's exactly right. In fact, the concern that I heard more than once was precisely this issue about Trump's ability to staff the department more easily now that he knows he can get acting officials put in place pretty quickly and that he may not even need people to be Senate confirmed. And as we learned from the last his last administration, at the very end, he had a lot of people who were acting in place, including Jeffrey Clark. And those people were left with a fair amount of very, very significant power. So that particular part of it, you are absolutely right to raise, because I think a lot of people felt like, okay, his first term, he's still sort of learning how the government works. He knows now, right? He knows that he can skirt some of these sort of personnel issues and sort of get his way with the department that way as well.
Ankush, before I have to let you go, I got like 20 seconds here, but I just wanted to know, Jeffrey Clark, he signed off on briefs that got the DOJ involved with E. Jean Carroll's defamation case. And he also got involved in the Stephanie Wolkoff case as well, where the DOJ sued her. I mean, it's not like he hasn't already used people like Jeffrey Clark. He plucks them out of obscurity and he uses them anyway. Ankush Khardori, thanks for the reporting. It's pretty strong. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.